Thank you, Diane, for sharing your experience and for your advocacy with NAMI to end the silence and to advocate for better mental health care and support and to eliminate the many, many barriers that exist to accessing them. And I'm also grateful to Sunny Darling and all the members who have been participating in our mental health discussion group for caring so much about building an inclusive community of care here at UUSM. Talking openly about mental health and mental illness is a critical first step. To repeat that Glenn Close quote, what mental health needs is more sunlight, more candor, and more unashamed conversation. Acknowledging the widespread reality of mental illness among us and our families, from low-grade anxiety to debilitating depression and psychosis, across the spectrum from undiagnosed to dual or multiply diagnosed. It's all present, it's all real, and researchers tell us it's getting worse. According to recent statistics, over 1 in 5 Americans struggle with mental health challenges in a given year, and the rate is even higher among youth. And of course, if we broke it down into demographics, the rate is much higher for people who face multiple forms of marginalization already. We are also experiencing a co-occurring epidemics of addiction and loneliness. So yes, we need more sunlight, more candor, more unashamed conversation about mental illness and mental health. We need more education and advocacy and a collective modeling that mental illness and mental health matter, that they are medical conditions with a biological basis and nothing to be ashamed of. We need a collective modeling that the only thing to be ashamed of is the stigma itself, the inadequate support, and the collective failure to meet the tremendous and growing need. Mental illness doesn't just affect the person directly experiencing it, it impacts everyone close to them too. So when I talk about people suffering from mental illness, I'm talking about everyone whose lives are impacted by it. Everyone who, because of the stigma around mental illness, suffer too often alone. Stigma can cause us to believe there are parts of ourselves or our lives that are unacceptable. When we believe parts of ourselves or our lives are unacceptable, making us unworthy of love or care, the suffering can become unbearable. When I was in my late 20s, I found myself sinking into something like that. I was a PhD student living alone in a small, windowless apartment. It gets worse. I was supposed to be preparing for my comprehensive exams, which I found overwhelmingly intimidating. I had recently ended an emotionally abusive relationship, and I didn't feel safe or know how to process the trauma. Like others with a family history of mental illness, I was predisposed for the scales to tip when faced with difficult life circumstances. But I didn't know that, and I didn't have the resources or the support to recognize that I might be in trouble. My friends were fiercely loving, but when the weeks of breakup crisis dragged into months of anxiety and a growing sense of despair, I didn't want to drag them down with me or burn them out with my incessant neediness. So I let my world get smaller and smaller. My windowless cave of an apartment was on a busy street. I had a dog Thank goodness for that connection to unconditional love. But even the dog hated that apartment. And I felt terribly guilty that it was getting harder and harder for me to leave it, even to take him to the park or just around the block. One day, when a friend came over to visit, my dog darted past her into the busy street. Thankfully, he didn't get hit, but that was a turning point for me. He wanted to escape, and so did I. I wasn't actively suicidal, but I wanted a way out of my life as it was. I remember seeing people, random people I didn't know, just going about their business and wishing I were them. Sometimes I even wished for a tragic accident. More often, though, I just wanted to disappear. Wanted someone or something to pop the bubble of my life so I could be free. It's hard now to remember exactly how I mustered up the will and the energy to reach out for help, but I did. I started going to a Buddhist meditation center. The teachings about suffering spoke to me. The practice of just sitting together with no expectation to talk supported me. Just walking into the space, taking off my shoes, selecting a meditation cushion, sitting on the floor amidst people I didn't even know. The faint smell of incense, the soft murmurings of life filling the silence, all of these things were a tremendous comfort to me. Here was a place I could just be. I could be with others without having to explain myself or pretend I was any different from how I actually was. On the wall at the front of the meditation hall hung 2 vertical banners. One said, "Unconditional acceptance," and the other said, "Unqualified confidence." I spent a lot of time pondering those 2 phrases. I had never been a fan of acceptance. I was much more focused on resistance. And who, besides a really egotistical person, could have unqualified confidence? I wondered. But sitting with these phrases at that point in my life, when so much of my old approaches were clearly no longer working, I was open to whatever they might mean. And over time, they did mean something. They did make sense. To me, unqualified confidence simply means faith. And unconditional acceptance means facing the truth, whatever it is, with an open mind and heart. They go together, and they are essential teachings for me now, helping me move forward whenever times get tough. Buddhism didn't save me. I eventually got a therapist and started medication. I needed those things too, but being in Buddhist community was an important part of my healing and recovery. It didn't have to be Buddhism. It could have been another religious community that offered unconditional acceptance and the reminder that I'm never alone, that gave me faith. It could have been this community. I needed the medication and I needed the therapy, but I also needed religious community. I needed religious community, not just community. There are a list of resources that I put on the back of our order of service today about spirituality, faith, and mental health. And I'm quoting from some of the books that are on there in this sermon, including Monica Coleman. Monica Coleman is a Christian minister and a theologian who lives with bipolar disorder. She describes her depressive episodes as a kind of death. She says that something dies with each depression, and that accepting that death, giving herself permission to mourn what has died, is an important part of her recovery. Having experienced my own crisis and accompanied others through far worse, This makes sense to me. Sometimes what dies during such episodes is a belief about ourselves or the world, a belief that we are invincible or in control or fully self-sufficient, or that we can always believe our own thoughts. When we're fortunate enough to have what we need to heal, these kinds of deaths can also deepen us spiritually, become sources of wisdom and compassion, sources of connection. That's been true for me. Coleman writes that what she longs for most of all when she's in the grips of depression is community. She writes, "I wish that other people could see me dying, even when I can't see it for myself, even before I know what has died. In these quiet deaths, I'd like to have others who will mourn and cry and worship and pray with me. For how long? Until I'm stable. Until I can acknowledge the death for myself. Until it's not so hard to eat and sleep and work. Until I accept and welcome the person I've become in the new life. Until, as Jesus says in his ascension speech to the disciples, until the power comes." That was Monica Coleman. Can we be that community here at UUSM? For some, we already are that community. I have heard stories of that kind of suffering and redemption experienced here. And that is such a beautiful and powerful thing. And you can keep building that community of care, expanding and deepening it, and I hope that you will. With the chronic stress and trauma of our times and the assaults on government-funded social safety nets and supports, it is more important now than ever that we create inclusive communities of care. Communities that invest in accessibility, not only for people with physical disabilities, but for neurodivergent people as well, including those with mental illness. Communities that counter stigma, isolation, and shame. Communities that break the silence like we are doing now. Communities that offer real connection. Communities that choose presence over perfection, compassion over control, acceptance over judgment, love over fear. My friends, no matter how much people try to force us into them, we do not live in prescribed little boxes or neat circles with clear centers and margins. We are way too complex, diverse, and dynamic for such neat little shapes. We live along spectrums, continuums, many of them. Most of us are closer to the center on some spectrums and farther from the center on others. And we don't stay in the same spot along those spectrums either. That's all normal. Nature loves diversity and complexity and spectrums. It is the very stuff of life. So wherever we are on those spectrums at any given time, it's okay. Because the only thing that should always be at the center is love. UU minister Kate Landis, who lives with a depressive condition, writes, "I don't know why we are born or what happens when we die. I don't know why mental illness exists, but I do know that we have a choice. Believe in a God who is ultimately powerful or ultimately loving. For me," she writes, "God is a force, a push to do what is loving. God is the voice that urges us to forgive. God is a piece of every living creature, the best piece, the part that connects us, the part that makes us brave enough to embrace each other. God is always cheering on everyone struggling, anyone who feels hopeless. God is my ancestors whispering in my ear when I think the depression will never end. Hang in there. You are stronger than you know. It only gets better up ahead. That was Reverend Kate Landis. I don't often use the word God, but when I do, that is the God that I mean. The God of love who pushes us to do what is loving, who is a piece of every living creature, the best piece, the part that connects us and cheers on anyone struggling, anyone who feels hopeless. That kind of God doesn't have the power to fix us or to orchestrate everything so it turns out just right, and neither do we. Fixing everything isn't the point. Perfection isn't the point. Connection is the point. Love is the point. Back to Pooh and Piglet. Did they save Eeyore? Who's to say? They sat with him. They didn't change the topic or rush off to find someone more pleasant to be around. And they didn't do anything to try to fix him either. They sat, listened, and accepted him unconditionally, just the way he was. And that helped. When we sit with someone who is suffering, listening with compassion and acceptance, we create an opening for wholeness, for holiness. Because wholeness doesn't mean only the good stuff. It means all the stuff, the whole of us. This is what creating inclusive community of care means to me. A community that enables us to bring our full selves, our whole selves. A community that reminds us in word and deed that we are beloved no matter what. Wholly beloved and not alone. Say it with me. Wholly beloved and not alone. I want to end with a blessing by Reverend Kate Landis from her book, Stubborn Grace, Faith, Mental Illness, and Demanding a Blessing. I invite you to close your eyes again and really take this in if you can, like it's a message just for you. I want you to know that you are loved beyond your wildest imaginings by the Spirit of creation. Every bit of you is holy, even the embarrassing parts, even the thoughts you wouldn't tell your best friend. God is in your every cell, calling you to live a loving, joyful, boisterous life, to go easier on yourself, to accept that you are a blessing, to spread the word that there is no original sin, that we are all glorious gifts to a world that desperately needs us. I want you to know that you are a strand in the web of all existence, one dew-dropped spangled thread reflecting the early morning sun, connected to every other living creature, frogs, mushrooms, great blue whales, and you. You are never alone. You were born into a huge family of life. Sit in the grass and know that it is your sibling. Watch the crows circle and think of them as gossiping cousins. This is your world, and you are worthy. Let us spread this message, my friends, this message that we are, say it with me again, holy, beloved, and never alone. Holy, beloved, and never alone.
Just as you are without changing a thing, just as you are, I accept you. I see you, as you are, just as you are.